Right. Hello, everybody. Oh, yeah, I do want the list. I can talk while we get the list. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kelly Writers House Speakeasy, the last one of the 2021-2022 academic year. Pretty exciting stuff. We have basically just two rules here at the Speakeasy. Poetry, prose, anything goes. You can share anything you'd like. But we ask that if there's any sort of severe content or any content that you think deserves some sort of warning, that you give a little warning. I feel like the time limit for tonight will be around 3 minutes, but it's not the most strictly enforced timeline. First up, we have Stephen Holland.
Can I put this up? Oh, yeah. Okay. Before I start, I just wanted to thank the Writers House for having me again. I've been here for years, and happy and proud that I have been awarded an invitation to return to the Writers House. I consider it to be a privilege for which I show my appreciation and respect. This is a poem I wrote tonight on the way here because I knew I wanted to say something to this class. Greetings, hello, it's time at hand. Life has brought the hour again. A spell, a room, a place, a friend I appreciate and do commend. At first I heard it from faint inspiration, a notion of love and elation, how it seemed a mystery and found it truly only seemed to me. What verse is woven at time reserves a moment. In creation a moment was divine. So what am I to imagine? As such I had doxology and history, a certain individuality, encouragement, guidance, and appreciation. Began the world, began a nation, unfurled at first without judgment. We wonder what our cosmic God meant. Love and obedience, it seemed to be a command of overhand entity. What controversy did ensue? Who began to notice what was right and what was true? A figure did emerge, forbearance in an understanding, providing concierge. So, moved to stir, I did just then and succeeded at the time. In act and perseverance went forth in my time. At midway, my conscience materialized. I focused on rising night and pressed and centralized. At spoken word, I conveyed a signal that would not rest inside. A term of resistance, effort true, and without any compromise. I forged the streets. I learned the signs. Inside, I kept it tight. Any direction or interjection to give us back our rights. While I was reading in the margin, I kept my nation and privileges, while deficits did largen. True as a light, I fathom then the right of way. Get thee hence toward the end, for we will not give or sway. My voice, the solemn tone, did project an artifice of life that I meant by will held near the meaning of this night. Each vital life, everyone who had to labor on what fortune would come of this ambivalence, rambled on, possibly disappearing, triggering off deceit. I rose to repeat the arguments of truth and supplication. Winning in the end, I smiled to myself, What foolish thing would deprive each of us of wealth? Any person or technology written in the books proclaim to us the wits it stands to win the nation at hand. Of the will of Viceroy and of the time of age and despair, what had written and been recorded had been rare. I recalled now existed and intelligence did preside. A world on the brink, what's left to think, the slave man still to surmise. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Glad to have you back, I guess. Next up, we have Enrique. Gorgeous. Hello. Do you need a second mic for your guitar?
I think I'm not going to use a mic at all. I think stupid.
All right.
How's everyone doing? Good. Okay. How you doing? So my name's Enrique, and I write sad songs pretty often. It's a form of therapy for me. I don't know if anyone feels the same way about writing. I'm sure you do. And so I've, wanted to come here and play you one of my songs. I wrote this one that I want to play tonight about a year ago, and it's quite personal, so just be aware. It's about feeling lost in a city and feeling like you don't really belong. Has anybody felt that way before? Alright, sounds good. So if you can all do me a favor and snap at the rhythm of my foot, because that way we get a little communication going. It's not awkward for me to be reading you my journal. So I'll get the chord progression going and you guys can snap with me. Cool. I'm coming here to you with a healing soul and a broken heart. Every street I cross, every turn I take, just reminds me that I might be wrong to stay. So don't you dare walk away from me. Don't you dare look away from my eyes. Don't you dare now tell me that it isn't real. Don't you dare disappear. I'm looking through my phone. Can things go back to how they were before? Came all the way to make amends, find peace, just so that you'll forgive the way I've been. So don't you dare walk away from me. Don't you dare look away from my eyes. Don't you dare now tell me that it isn't real. Don't you dare disappear. 'Cause I know it's hard to find the ways to say goodbye when you've been lonely so much time. Does anyone feel me? 'Cause I know it's hard to find the ways to say you're fine when you've been locked inside your mind. Don't you dare walk Don't you dare no tell me that it isn't. Don't you dare disappear. Also, guys, I'm okay. I'm not sad all the time. I swear. Thanks.
No, it's too tall for me. Thank you so much, Enrique. That was lovely. Next up, we have Jeff. Yay.
Hey everyone, my name is Jeff. I'm going to read a piece that I've been working on for a little while that's a little bit longer. So I'll read the beginning of it. Not sure if this is a necessary warning, but it does talk about death. It's currently titled Memoirs of a Father. Did you enjoy having a lot of kids? He stared back at me, thought about it for a few long seconds, what seemed like minutes. Shouldn't this be an easy question to answer? Why is it taking any thought at all? Sometimes. That was his answer, nothing more. It was like I had asked him if he likes milk in his coffee. Sometimes. I never pressed him on it, and not too long after he died, not immediately by any stretch, but short enough that I never worked up the guts to ask him to clarify. I never asked him what he liked about having a lot of kids. What was the upside of sometimes? My dad kept a journal for a period of time. After we had moved out of the house, some excerpts follow. March 31st, 1996. I miss my children. I always believed that my children would live around the corner from me. Not long after the question, and before I never worked up the guts to ask him to clarify, I asked him if he wanted to keep living. It was a couple of days after Christmas. We had rushed to the hospital on Christmas Day. He wasn't doing well, is what we were told. My mom called and I dropped to the ground on the phone. We had opened gifts with the kids and were planning on staying in pajamas all day. Within an hour, we were on the road to see my dad. The doctor met with me and my mom. They said he didn't have much more time and we should ask him if he wanted to live. He made it sound like that was the mature and adult thing to do. I imagined it was what well-adjusted families whose parents never argued in front of their kids did, or maybe families that watched Sunday football together did. Do you want to keep living? I asked him. He got angry. I immediately wanted to take it back, to swallow those words as they floated in the air between my mouth and his ears. But there was no taking it back. It hung there between us. Had I taken away something from his fight? He wasn't supposed to live this long with his degenerating disease, but somehow he was living. Did asking him make him scared? It's hard to imagine him not being. Did he think I didn't believe in his ability to somehow beat an unbeatable disease? July 1st, 1997. It doesn't look good for Mom. The nurse from the emergency room at the hospital, Mrs. Carlson, called about a living will. Then she let the doctor talk. I couldn't really say, I know that my brother wants her to live forever, but I believe she is suffering and thinks she should pass gently into eternity. But I really can't reconcile myself to the fact that I will have no parents. I'll be an orphan. I spent the next several days in the hospital with my dad. I read articles from the New York Times to him. We watched Mr. Bean videos and laughed. We laughed so hard it was like he was healed and I had snuck into his room after bedtime because I couldn't sleep, and we watched Johnny Carson together, and my father let out glorious bellowing laughs. Laughs like no one is watching, just me and him. Laughing, no words, sometimes laughing at something that seemed inappropriate for me to watch, adult humor. We laughed, we never talked, and then I went back to bed. Days went by. He seemed okay. Not good, but not getting worse. I felt like I had asked him too soon. Had I killed his spirit? July 2nd, 1997. Dear Diary, Teresa was with my mother yesterday while she was in the emergency. She is the daughter she didn't have. I asked her what she would do about the living will. Teresa said she would do everything possible to keep her alive. Yet Peg and her father, Lou, talk about letting her go. It is a hard decision because she still responds to our words and expressions. Scrubby the dog barks, he can't talk. Mom points and nods and makes sounds. I'm going to call Irene and ask what went on. Irene said that Mom just slept all day. If they gave her dioxin, she would make her sleep. She may have also received sedatives. A few days later, they released him from the hospital. I logged into my Netflix account on my parents' new smart TV and then went home with my young family. July 10th, 1997. 2 days later, and the situation has changed immensely. Jeff and I went to see Mom. She was alert and the fever had subsided, though Dr. Joani said she still had the infection. I don't believe it. She is turning the corner, and even her doctor can't believe it. I guess she is really fearless and has a strong desire to live. The falling asleep ritual in my house growing up often included one of us yelling from our beds to my dad in the living room. Dad, I'm thirsty. Bring me water. Or Daddy, rub my back. He was sitting in the living room. I can only imagine exhausted from the day of work and the post-work challenges of 5 kids. He sat there with my mother, who was also exhausted from having the 5 of us all day long. As a parent myself now, I can get a glimpse into what could have been going through their heads. Please just go to sleep. They waited. Maybe we would stop. I shared a room with my younger brother at this point. At one point, all 3 of the boys shared this room. I can still picture my brother climbing in and out of the crib, probably an indication he was in there long after its intended and probably safe use. It was the 70s. Ralph Nader hadn't made the case for seatbelts. On any given night, it could have been the yelling or my brother or maybe one of my sisters from the next room over in our 4-bedroom ranch that housed the 7 of us. Eventually, my dad would come with a cup or maybe cups of water, depending on the members of the choir that night, and then he would sit on the edge of my bed and rub gentle circles on my back. His hand was big enough to almost cover my entire back, and then that slow drifting off to blissful sleep.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I found it very moving and very touching. Next up, we have Vishit. Can you say your name first? Vitret? Vichet. Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to know.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Vichet. I work for the School of Medicine. I'm from Philadelphia. I've been working on a series of personal essays because of this kind of social inflection point about Asian American stories becoming more visible. Content warning. There are references to genocide, murder, and PTSD. I'm only reading the beginning of this essay, by the way, because it's still a work in progress. I was born lucky. Jaundiced, but 3 days later in an incubator, I survived. And I was born to a Cambodian refugee family that, by late 1985, probably wasn't on welfare anymore. Or at least I don't think we were. We didn't have play money. I knew that since before I could count. But I never had to worry about food or clothes, even if the food was canned sardines with dill pickles and the clothes were all hand-me-downs. I had parents with a working knowledge of English who were both employed. That's a rarity for a child of Cambodian refugees. We were still maybe 2 missed paychecks from being out of house and home, but I never experienced what my parents did, and I was rarely hungry. I had an adoptive grandmother, Grace. That was the one grandparent I had, because all of my biological grandparents were dead, victims of either poverty or the Cambodian Civil War. I don't know my paternal grandparents' names. My grandmother on that side died shortly after Pa was born. His father couldn't take care of him. He was basically an orphan. I don't know the details about my parents, Tapuang and Yelong. The bits and pieces I know, because it's still a sensitive subject, is that the Khmer Rouge overran Kapong Cham, and my maternal grandparents were wealthy. They were executed and their house was burnt down. The stone base of the steps to their house are still there, 100 feet from the banks of the Mekong River. Mai's youngest brother and sister, Sotia and Sotia, less than 5 years old at the time, were killed as well, because they still lived at home instead of in the capital like their older brother and sisters. Neighbors say they took Sotia by the legs and brained him against a tree. If you don't know what that means, don't look it up. Sotia ran into the jungle and never came out. I didn't learn their names or even know they existed until I was an adult. Not for lack of great effort and suffering, my mom was lucky. The rest of the family managed to stay together through the concentration camps. There were close calls. Starvation cast the longest shadow. The rice ration was about 1 or 2 uncooked tablespoons per day. They knotted scarves around their midsections as a folk remedy for hunger pangs. They ate any kind of grass that was halfway digestible. They farmed rice from sunup to sundown for 4 years, rice that they weren't allowed to eat, rice that was sold to the Soviet Union or China for more bullets that often ended up in the skulls of Cambodians who didn't harvest enough rice. That was until the Khmer Rouge decided that bullets were too expensive and farm tools would do. I was told these stories before I could learn to read. I learned fear and sadness. I learned that I was born lucky. They told me that my Uncle Lai and Aunt Giang were caught exchanging messages once. Knowing how to read and write could be a death sentence. My oldest Uncle Chia convinced the guards with bribes and who knows what else to stay the execution. My cousins and I don't know how to ask them about how they managed to survive when so many didn't, because asking them brings them back to those places. We are left with just enough information to worry and wonder. After the Vietnamese grew tired of the Khmer Rouge border raids on their border, they invaded. When that happened, every boy over 12 who could carry a rifle was called to the east. My mother's family escaped through the jungles in the west between Battambang and Thailand. The story is that when they reached the border in May of 1979, they got rounded up by the Thai military and placed in a detention area fenced off with barbed wire, along with other refugees. Refugees were then loaded onto trucks. There were 2 rumors about these trucks. 1, they would bring the refugees to the various aid camps along the Thai border. 2, they would bring the refugees back to the concentration camps on the Cambodian side. An apocryphal Khmer Rouge slogan read, "To keep you is no benefit, to destroy you is no loss." So it wasn't hard to imagine what the Khmer Rouge would do with the returned escapees. The evidence of their punishment was strewn into shallow graves all over the countryside, eventually referred to as the killing fields. I've seen these fields. In one of the memorials near the capital of Phnom Penh, they built a plexiglass tower filled only with skulls. You have to crane your neck to the sky to see its top. Hundreds of thousands of skulls of every shape and size, with bullet and ice pick holes of every shape and size. The trucks. My Uncle Chia bargained his way onto the right truck, and they ended up in the Palelai refugee camp on the Thai border. And instead of languishing in the camp for years, as many were forced to, they got sponsored to come to the U.S. by a church in Philadelphia within a couple of months. On July 8th, 1979, they touched down in New York City. They were in West Philly the next day at 4242 Chestnut Street, a 2-bedroom, where 12 of them stayed. I bought my West Philly home in 2009 near 42nd and Market, less than 2 blocks away from where my mother had been settled as a refugee. When she came with me to see the house for the first time, she said, "Jet, that's the corner where we used to hop on the truck to Jersey to pick berries for summer cash." And at the bottom of the housing market crash of 2008, because my lucky ass, that had been fired from a shitty job in New York and had been hired to a stable one in Philly, I was able to afford a home. I only exist because both of my parents fled one of the greatest atrocities in the 20th century and happened to meet in West Philadelphia. I was born lucky.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad that you're going to continue with it. I think it will be wonderful. Next up, we have Gabs.
Hi. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. That was amazing. You should keep writing. I am sharing creative nonfiction. When my grandmother was dying, I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It seemed like the thing to do, since everyone stood gathered around in one room, and I figured watching someone die would make everyone forget to eat, and feeding people and licking jelly off knives makes me happy, so I went to my grandmother's house carrying peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, my reason for coming. There was no one in the kitchen, of course. My mother and her sisters and brother, my aunts and uncles and older cousins, the hospice worker who came last week, my grandfather, they were all in the great room where she lay dying. My sister sat in a chair in the kitchen, not knowing what to do, and I slowly arranged all the sandwiches, taking off the plastic wrap to let the simple sandwiches breathe for a second, sitting proudly on that plate. I took the time in rearranging them the way a baker fusses over the display tray of her craft, picking at crumbs, swiping at oozing peanut butter. I'd made a variety, of course, not knowing how everyone liked their peanut butter and jellies. I had my healthy seed bread with crunchy peanut butter and raspberry jam, and then the low-calorie bread that looked as if it had been bleached. It was so white. And I had what I like to call my slutty PB&Js, cinnamon raisin bread with extra peanut butter and jelly, also with slices of banana to spice things up. I heard crying from the great room, people talking to her. I looked up from the tray. I'd already eaten one without realizing, and my sister looked up too, but she just sat back in her chair, the voices like a warning. But I, being curiously selfish, decided I ought to go, in with the rest of our family, standing around the bed in the great room as she lay dying. I wanted to see her, I thought, at least one last time alive. But she wasn't quite alive, I realized, when I crammed into a spot around the bed, everyone crying and touching and saying, "It's all right." Her eyes looked strange. I don't know how long it takes someone to die, or if my brief moment counts, but I was there and I touched her hand because I wanted to touch her hand before she was a corpse. But the touch made me scared and I ran out of the room and back to the kitchen. My sister looked up when she saw me, before looking back down. More relatives arrived, lingering in the kitchen. We'd arrived at noon, and by 1:15, the house was an eerie party. Then more cries. We got there at noon. By 12:17, she was dead. Men in masks came to remove the body. Everyone from the great room slowly spilled out, flushed and overwhelmed, laughing, crying, arguing. Everyone thanked me for the sandwiches, eating them heartily. People express grief in such strange ways, laughing and crying and swallowing thick lumps of peanut butter down their throats that they can't digest without wine. Someone opened the wine. 12:30 was a luncheon at my grandmother's house. I ate 4 sandwiches by accident. Everyone came out of the dining room absolutely famished. Thanks.
Thanks, Gaps. Next up we have Prithi.
Hi guys. This is my first time performing here. This is a poem that I wrote about my ex that I'm still kind of in love with. But yeah. It's called Me More. I love you, me more. I know you like the back of my hand. Or should I say the backs of your hands, because I've spent more time in them than my own. I love you, me more. Hum to the tune of you and me. I will lift mine eyes before yours, and you'll set me as a seal. Tethered, I'll never let you go. I love you, me more. Meaning the hand on your chest when you laugh too hard. Meaning not so secret handshakes. Meaning your eyelashes. Meaning your head in my lap. Meaning off-key singing in the car. I want you, me more. Toes curling, thighs